To set the tone for us and the scene for today's proceedings and to delve a little bit deeper into why we are here. Mr. Colin Smith, thank you.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Minerals Council Women in Mining workshop. I'm glad to see so many people in the audience, and thank you for making time to be here. I know we all have our day jobs, and this is a very special and, you know, it's a topic that's sort of special, or not special, it's close to my heart, and something that I hope in the fullness of time we can eradicate from the mining operations that we are very familiar with. So every 2.5 hours in South Africa, a woman is murdered. Nearly half of our boys will experience sexual abuse before they reach adulthood, shaping behaviors that too often fuel cycles of violence. These are not abstract statistics. They represent our colleagues, our neighbors, our families, and they remind us that we do not have society's problems, or we do not leave society's problems at the mine gate. The mining industry has shown time and time again that we can make bold changes on safety, on technology, and on transformation. Today, we bring that same determination to an issue that reaches beyond the mine gate, creating workplaces free from gender-based violence and harassment. We bring our whole selves to work, including our histories, our traumas, and the pressures of daily life. Mining is often geographically isolated, yet our operations are deeply connected to the fabric of South African society. Mines are not just workplaces, they are communities. People build lives, families, and futures around them. That means the pandemic of gender-based violence and harassment inevitably reaches our workplaces. However, what we can do is we can create safe workplaces that help build safe communities. That's why what we do inside the mine gate matters so much outside of them. The International Labour Organization has made it clear a safe and healthy working environment is a fundamental right. South Africa is a signatory to conventions that oblige us, not only legally, but morally, to create workplaces free from violence, discrimination, and harassment. This is more than compliance. It's about human dignity. Every person has the right to safety, to decent work, and to the opportunity of self-actualization. When harassment or violence happens, it does not harm just one person. It affects teams, it reduces trust, disrupts productivity, and puts safety at risk. The cost is human, cultural, and economic. GBVH is rooted in behaviors that have been normalized for far too long. In a male-dominated environment like mining, silence and acceptance have allowed stereotypes and power imbalances to persist. But silence is complicity. Real change begins with leadership, and all of us in this room are leadership that can change and shape the future and way forward. It requires us to speak out, to challenge harmful behaviors, and to model the culture that we expect. Today's session reflects the power of collaboration. We are joined by government, private sector, education, and legal experts, all of whom play a role in building the safe workplaces and communities we all come from. Through the Women in Mining strategy and its integration into the Minerals Council Khumbula Ekhaya 2.0 strategy, we are taking action. Khumbula Ekhaya, meaning remember home, is about more than safety underground. It's about leadership, accountability, human-centered culture, and risk intelligence. Today we are joined by Wentzel, who will guide us through legal frameworks. Craig Wilkinson, thanks Craig, from Father a Nation, will share how we can amplify positive masculinity. And we, all of us in this room, as leaders, must turn policy into practice. Colleagues, mining matters in South Africa, but mining cannot thrive while violence persists. Our vision of zero harm must include not only physical safety underground, but also emotional and psychological safety on surface. We cannot change the past, but we can definitely shape the future.
We've got our team from Wentzel who are here to help us along the way and give us the legal expertise as well as the legal perspective. Apologies. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Lizle, to welcome Kate as well as Sia to the stage and hand over to them to give us the legal perspective. Thank you.
Our presentation today will have 4 parts. First of all, Kate and I will set the legal landscape and explain where our processes at work actually come from. What is the legislation and the national acts that govern the processes that find its way into your policies? I'll be addressing the employment side of that, and Kate will be addressing the health and safety side of that. Sia will then discuss a few practical examples excuse me, including the Mtsweyo Anglo case, where we represented Anglo and where it was a question of what can employers do against GBV committed by an employee against an employee outside of work. Kate and I will then speak on the practical stuff, our policies, our procedures. What do we do to address this scourge in the workplace? And the good news is there's a lot we can do. So if we stand together and implement our processes, it's a very good start. And then we will end off with a Q&A. Let me see if I get this right. So this workshop addresses GBV and harassment. It is therefore important for us at the start to understand the difference between these two concepts. What is GBV and what is harassment? Is it the same? It is not. GBV is an umbrella term used for harmful acts of violence and discrimination against a person based on their gender. Broad umbrella term. Sexual harassment, on the other hand, is a form of GBV. It includes unwanted sexual conduct and can take many forms. It can be physical, it can be verbal, or it can be non-verbal. In other words, not all acts of GBV are sexual harassment, but sexual harassment is always a form of GBV. So if you look at this, if you think about GBV as the umbrella term and its different forms that fall within its boundaries, you have psychological abuse, sexual violence, physical violence, and sexual harassment as a form of GBV. So it's important for us to start here because it pulls through to our procedures and the legal principles applicable to what we do when we encounter GBV or harassment at work. I'm sure all of you have policies to deal with sexual harassment at work. Some of you may even have policies to deal with GBV at work, but I don't think all of us do. So for now, when we come to the process part of our presentation, the same processes that you use to deal with complaints of sexual harassment at work, you can use to deal with complaints of GBV at work if you do not have a special GBV policy. From an employment perspective, the laws that guide us and that pulls through to our at-work policies, of course, we start at our beautiful Constitution. Section 9 of our Constitution gives all of us the right to equality. Section 23 of our Constitution gives all of us the right to fair labour practices. Our Constitution then says Parliament go and enact national legislation that give effect to these constitutional basic human rights for all of us. Examples of that, of course, is our Employment Equity Act and our Labour Relations Act. In fact, The Code of Good Practice on Eliminating Harassment says the following about our Employment Equity Act. It says, the Employment Equity Act constitutes one of the key legislative and policy interventions within the ethos of South Africa's Constitution to achieve equity in the work environment by promoting equal opportunity and fair treatment. Okay, so we have the Constitution, we have the Employment Equity Act. Then, of course, we have the Code of Good Practice on the prevention and elimination of harassment. I'm sure all of you have read that, and I'm sure that plays a very important part in the policies and procedures you have at work. The Code of Good Practice, even though its title refers only to harassment, in its introduction, it does refer to GBV and how GBV is part of this code. It says, South Africa regards all forms of harassment as a form of unfair discrimination and constitutes a barrier to equality in the workplace. Therefore, all forms of harassment, such as sexual harassment and GBV, must be eliminated. Colin touched on the ILO convention. Kate will go into a bit more detail on that when she comes up now. And lastly, of course, there is PEPUDA. PEPUDA is a national act. It's a piece of legislation that covers discrimination and aims to prevent discrimination outside of the world of work. We mention it here because in our environment, our employees often at work deal with non-employees. They deal with contractors, they deal with service providers, they deal with visitors. And unfortunately, harassment and discrimination and GBV could occur in those interactions as well. For now, I'm going to hand over to Kate to explain the health and safety laws applicable.
Historically, managing health and safety on mines and workplaces in general has been the realm of the health and safety department, separate from HR and legal teams. But the importance of marrying those two streams and teams is becoming all the more important in understanding that they actually work hand in hand to protect employees while they are at work, and the obligations placed on employers are fairly similar across employment law as a whole, with health and safety being a specific subsect of employment law and the obligations of employers towards their employees specifically. In the mining context, you will all know we are bound by the Mine Health and Safety Act, which talks generally about the obligations of an employer to ensure that employees are safe and not exposed to harm to their health while they are at work. It also places a broad obligation on employers to ensure that what they are doing, i.e. their undertakings, do not expose persons who are not employees to harm. And that includes members of the public who may be in the immediate community and surrounds of a mining operation. Our courts are increasingly interpreting these obligations broadly and with a strict liability context, meaning that the obligations placed on employers through the Mine Health and Safety Act are being seen through a very strict lens through which the courts are looking to hold employers accountable. While we were grappling with COVID, the Labour Court held that there can be no bright line between what happens in communities and what happens in the mining operations, and employers must understand that there is a direct impact of what happens from outside in, and equally an impact from how hazards are dealt with in the mining industry as to how those then impact, how those risks and harms are dealt with in the communities. And that principle can be seen really clearly when we look at the measures that mines can take in dealing with harassment and GBV and the impact that those can have on the broader communities. We also see a trend of looking to involve the structures that mines may have in the broader community when we look at publications and documents promulgated under the Mine Health and Safety Act, particularly codes of practice, which we'll talk to you shortly. The Mine Health and Safety Act historically has been looked at and interpreted, as I mentioned, quite from an inward-looking perspective, but that is changing. Firstly, from the fact that safety is defined extremely broadly in the Mine Health and Safety Act, but also from the perspective that there is an increasing acceptance that mental health in the workplace is equally an issue that employers have to grapple with and put measures in place for their employees to be protected. And understanding where a mental health concern may originate is always going to be a difficult issue to grapple with. The issue of gender-based violence, femicide and harassment in the workplace is directly linked to an employee's mental health and psychological safety in the workplace, rendering keeping employees safe from what would historically be seen as external to the direct mining operations of an employer, and a way of old thinking. And employers are increasingly required, not only from a moral and ethical perspective, but by our courts, to look more broadly at the hazards to which employees may be exposed to in the workplace and to deal with all of them, even if they may not be directly and inherently linked to digging ore out of the ground. A year ago, the Chief Inspector of Mines published the Code of Practice on Management of GBVF, Safety and Security Challenges in the SA Mining Industry. This document acknowledges that GBVF is a profound and widespread problem in South Africa. And the Code of Practice stems from Mine Health and Safety Council research, which really focused on the fact that this is an endemic problem, not only in South Africa, but particularly identified in the mining industry. And that because of the inherent nature of it and the fact that it has been so widespread and identified in the mining industry, it really made it appropriate to call for particular regulatory and legal processes to guide employers on how to deal with it and to keep employees safe from GBVF in the workplace. That's an important acceptance and acknowledgement by the regulator. Firstly, that there needs to be regulatory frameworks in which to guide the way in which this hazard can be dealt with. Unfortunately, as much as a regulatory framework is very helpful, it cuts both ways. Because where there is a regulatory framework, there's also the ability to hold employers accountable and liable if those regulatory frameworks are dismissed or not properly implemented in the workplace. It also highlights the fact that gender-based violence and harassment is now a foreseeable and accepted hazard in the workplace. The moment something is foreseeable, an employer must take measures to deal with it. There is no ability for an employer to say, well, this isn't common in our workplace. The regulator is now telling you that it is. Even if a particular mine may not have experienced it in large numbers, that may well be because we aren't aware of it, aren't gathering the data. While employees may be experiencing it in their homes and communities, that harm, that mental health impact, that psychological damage comes with those employees into the workplace, which equally affects the safety of crews and individuals while they are at work. Prevention strategies should therefore include a combination of workplace policies and procedures based on sound legislative, regulatory, and enforcement frameworks. In addition to the hard codified law, that's your employment laws, your Mine Health and Safety Act, and your Code of Practice, there is an increasing acceptance of the importance of compliance with what we call soft law. And that is making sure that we interpret and apply our laws and obligations in line with international conventions. We've heard already this morning the ILO Convention on Violence and Harassment being mentioned. South Africa is a signatory to this convention, and what this means is that there is a national imperative to develop and implement laws which strengthen the fact that employees must be able to be safe from harm, harassment, and violence while they are at work. But it also means that where there are existing statutes in place, they must be interpreted within this framework and the goals that South Africa is trying to achieve. So even though the Mine Health and Safety Act may have been implemented many years before this convention was signed, when we are interpreting its goal, its purpose, and how you want to roll it out at your operations, we must look at the framework and the objectives in terms of how our government is trying to deal with these hazards and interpret it to work with that convention in terms of the systems that we're trying to put in place to prevent violence and harassment in the workplace. Our courts have been grappling with this. And ultimately, it's going to come down to how employers deal with it when they receive a complaint and how they then run those legal processes. To give you a flavor of what can be achieved and how our courts have grappled with what employers can do from a reasonableness perspective, Sia's going to take you through a couple of judgments, and then Lizle and I will get into what you can take out of here practically to roll out in your organizations.
The case is Ngcamu and Anglo-American, which was reported in the ILJ. Now, in this matter, we had acted for Anglo-American, and the matter concerned the question of whether Anglo was entitled to discipline an employee for acts of gender-based violence that had occurred outside of the workplace and in circumstances where there were pending criminal proceedings. Of its own volition, Anglo had in place a domestic violence policy, which all employees were provided training on. The disciplinary code had also specifically stated that any act of GBV will be met with a sanction of dismissal, whether it occurred outside or inside of the workplace. In this case, the employee had been in a romantic relationship with the victim. The victim was also employed by Anglo. On the 16th of August, 2023, the employee, the victim, and other employees attended the Marikana commemoration. After the event, the employee and the victim went home together and spent the night together. But tragically, the victim was declared deceased in the early hours of 17 August 2023. The employee was arrested and he was charged with murder. On the 5th of September, the employee was released on bail and attended work at the mine, whereafter he was then placed on suspension. He was later charged for breaching the domestic violence policy and not acting in accordance with Anglo's values. Following the disciplinary process, the employee was then dismissed with immediate effect. The employee then referred an unfair dismissal dispute to the CCMA, where he contended that his dismissal was unfair for various reasons, including that no fair process was followed because the disciplinary hearing had been conducted by way of written representations, and we can appreciate why the victim was not there to speak for themselves. He also contended that he did not commit any act of GBV, that the incidents occurred outside of the workplace, and that he had already been charged, so he could not face any disciplinary action. Now, at the arbitration, Anglo sought to prove that the dismissal was fair by leading evidence of the policies and that the employee was trained on the policies. And it also subpoenaed the victim's son, the employee's friend, and the state's pathologist who performed the post-mortem. The evidence revealed shocking facts. It revealed that the victim had suffered from internal bleeding, fractured ribs, and swelling, which on the probabilities had been caused by the infliction of the force and strangulation prior to the death of the victim. The evidence also revealed that the employee had, on previous occasions, committed acts of GBV against the victim. And interestingly, the persons who gave the evidence on the previous acts of GBV were the victim's son and the perpetrator's best friend. The commissioner evaluated the evidence and found that the dismissal was procedurally fair, as the employee was given an opportunity to state his version by way of written representations. But I want to stop here first and explain what the employee's version was in the context of the poem by Chris van Wyk in detention. The perpetrator said, "We were drinking, and I tried to grab the last can from her, and she fell against the wall. She bumped her head, then she fell forward into the chair where she cracked her ribs, and she fell into the table, and that's how she got a bruised eye." Now, the primary question before the commissioner was whether the dismissal was substantively fair in light of all the circumstances, which included that the incidents occurred outside of the workplace. The commissioner accepted that Anglo, as an employer, had a legitimate interest in the matter, as both the employee and the victim had been employed by Anglo, despite the incidents actually occurring outside of the workplace. The commissioner also accepted that Anglo was entitled to take disciplinary action, notwithstanding the criminal proceedings. Accordingly, Anglo was entitled to take disciplinary action, and the commissioner accepted that on a balance of probabilities, the injuries inflicted on the victim were inflicted by the employee and that he had committed the act of GBV. The commissioner was then satisfied that the appropriate sanction of dismissal was fair. After his dismissal, he was charged with criminal charges for murder, and Anglo assisted the NPA into the institution of the charges. What's interesting there is that the dockets had gone missing, but Anglo as an employer took it upon itself with our assistance to ensure that the docket is recompiled, using some of the information from the arbitration proceedings as well. The employee is now currently undergoing prosecution, and of course, he has pleaded not guilty. So the key takeaways from this case is that employers have a role in eradicating GBV and domestic violence. The next case that we're going to deal with is Moache versus Legend Golf and Safari Resorts. Now, this matter concerned a Section 60 application in terms of the Employment Equity Act. The employee was the victim. I see they're saying the slides are not moving. It's fine. The employee had sought to hold the employer liable in terms of Section 60 for the act of sexual harassment that occurred in respect of her. The Labour Court found in that particular instance that the employer was not liable because it had taken all the necessary steps to eliminate these sexual harassments from the workplace. But the facts of this case are important, and to highlight what the court had in fact said in this particular matter. So the employee here had in fact resigned from the employment, and they had indicated that they're leaving. The perpetrator, Mr. Mchali, then said, let me accompany you to this particular site at the workplace so I can help you with some work. But when they got there, with no one present, Ngcamu asked the applicants to sleep with him for one last time, since she now wanted to resign and leave. The applicants refused. He then dragged her into the toilets and he raped her. This was on the work premises. What followed the rape was a bizarre series of events. The applicant testified in the trial that he forced her back into the vehicle, drove her away, told her that he doesn't want to go to jail and that he would kill her. At some point, Mr. Ngcamu stopped the vehicle and the applicant jumped out and tried to run away. Ngcamu, however, caught up with her and severely assaulted her at the workplace, using a rock, a lid of a pot, and then his fists. The applicant stated in the course of his assault, she then became unconscious. The Labour courts accepted that this conduct constituted sexual harassment. It was, of course, assault. But the court said, no, the employer cannot be liable because the employer took all the necessary steps by taking disciplinary action and removing her and him from the workplace, pending the criminal proceedings. Because strangely, the NPA had informed the employer that they cannot interfere with the process and cannot take disciplinary action and use any of the evidence until the criminal proceedings had been done. But be that as it may, Mr. Ngcamu was then found guilty of attempted murder and rape, but he was fined with 2,000 Rand and a suspended sentence of 5 years. But the Labour Court didn't take this lightly. The Labour Court found the sentence to be atrocious and accordingly referred the magistrates to the Magistrates Commission and the Legal Practice Council for further investigation. The last case that I'm going to go through is simply commentary by the Labour Court on the intersection between gender-based violence and sexual harassment. The Labour Court, the Constitutional Court stated, sexual harassment strips away at the core of a person's dignity and is the antithesis of substantive equality in the workplace. It promotes a culture of gender-based violence that dictates the lived experiences of women and men with public and private spaces and across personal and professional latitudes. Sexual harassment is concerned with the exercise of power and in the main reflects the power relations that exist both in society generally and specifically within a particular workplace. It concluded that sexual harassment occurs at the intersection of gender and power, producing a potent stench of subordination, disempowerment, and inequality that seeps through the fabric of our society that it stains at its core. So what are the key takeaways? The first takeaway is that employers need to deal with GBV at the workplace as a workplace issue, even if it occurs outside of the workplace. Employers need to take action against perpetrators of GBV. Employers need to provide assistance to victims of GBV within their workplaces, and they need to ensure the safety of its workplace by dealing with GBV as a form of misconduct. The case is Ngcamu and Anglo-American, which was reported in the ILJ. Now, in this matter, we had acted for Anglo-American, and the matter concerned the question of whether Anglo was entitled to discipline an employee for acts of gender-based violence that had occurred outside of the workplace and in circumstances where there were pending criminal proceedings. Of its own volition, Anglo had in place a domestic violence policy, which all employees were provided training on. The disciplinary code had also specifically stated that any act of GBV will be met with a sanction of dismissal, whether it occurred outside or inside of the workplace.
So what practically does the law require employers to have if we want to have the results that the courts can uphold the enforcement action that we take in the event of an incident of GBV or even femicide in our work premises or related to our employees? The first is that mining companies are required under the Code of Practice to adopt a zero tolerance approach and a zero tolerance commitment to gender-based violence and harassment. And this requires identifying clear plans in each workplace for elimination and prevention of gender-based violence and to report annually to the Mine Health and Safety Inspectorate on progress and implementation. The first report was due in February this year, with annual updates to the MHSI annually thereafter. From a policy development and implementation perspective, and Lizle will talk to the legal importance of having proper policies in place to hold employees accountable. both under employment law and your Mine Health and Safety Act obligations. You are expected as employers to develop comprehensive gender-based violence and femicide policies, which must address sexual harassment, gender discrimination, emotional abuse, bullying, and physical abuse. Again, this also reflects what is required of South African legislation under the ILO Convention, which also talks to bullying and harassment in the workplace more broadly. This harassment must be known to employees, and that must include being available on your public display notice boards across a workplace. Gender-based violence and sexual harassment must be standing items in induction and training programs, and training must be provided to strengthen prevention programs and gender mainstreaming, particularly for managers. Your policies must also talk to measures that will be implemented across all workplaces to ensure, as far as reasonably practicable, physical safety measures for employees at the workplace. Now, I want to be very clear, although most of these, because of the data available, speak to this physical safety of women at workplaces, there is just as much a need to have physical safety for men in workplaces, obviously. But because of the data that we're dealing with, most of the examples that we talk about physical safety measures for women in the mining industry. Examples that the policies give, which should not be seen as a closed list, these must be informed by the risk assessments done at each workplace. Talk about your minimum criteria being issues such as ensuring properly illuminated and lockable ablution facilities. Again, this comes from the data that a vast majority of physical harassment and physical attacks on women in particular occur in ablution and change house facilities where women are unable to lock themselves in properly, particularly when they are showering and changing, and where there is poor light. Gender-specific change rooms for women in mining in all working areas. You'd be amazed at the number of particularly small mines that still just have a shower facility where men and women are expected to shower and change together. The implementation of buddy systems and mobile radio communication for enhanced security. This really talks to systems identified to ensure that no one is left behind. That if someone is calling for help, there's someone aware and hearing that call, and that someone is aware if someone is missing. If someone hasn't clocked out at the right time, other than our formal systems and clocking protocols that we have, but are we just looking out for each other? We know we have this rule, in a general workplace safety perspective, my brother's keeper, buddy safety perspectives, but it's changing the mindset of that to looking out for physical safety. Have you clocked out? Are you alone in a dark place? I suppose in the same way as we check in with our female friends when we get home late at night, send me a WhatsApp when you get home safely. This is the same concept, but in a workplace situation. And then, as far as possible, installing cameras and monitoring systems. There is an increased obligation on employers in terms of the MHSA Code of Practice on reporting and response systems, particularly because we can only fix what we know. And data is important to assess risk, to plug gaps, and to ensure that we are properly supporting employees who need it. So employers must establish accessible, confidential, on-site reporting systems with the assurance of anonymity where this is required or preferred by complainants. Systems to ensure the immediate separation of victims from perpetrators. That includes in the workplace and, as far as possible, given abilities of employers and information available, where possible to extend that into communities and into family situations. If you are able to have systems in place where you can remove a victim of gender-based violence from a home situation or a community living environment where they are subject to abuse, employers are encouraged to do that. Providing referrals to employee health and wellness programs. But here the commentary is genuine referrals, not just a piece of paper with a random number that's going to go in a pocket and be forgotten, but supporting employees through those referral processes and making those referrals user-friendly and genuinely supportive. This goes to the next point of employers being required to have designated personnel for GBVF matters. Do employees know who to go to? Who is the person? Is that person genuinely approachable? Or is this going to become a matter that is then discussed at the pub on a Friday night because someone had the gall to reach out for help? And then establishing gender monitoring and evaluation committees. Closing the loop on the data and the information. If your systems are working, take what's working, strengthen it. Systems where there are gaps, where things aren't working optimally, change them, learn from what's not working. And it's a work in progress. We're all learning every day. Much like safety systems in general, the same principles will apply to the systems you have in place in preventing harassment and GBVF in your workplace. There is a large impetus in the Code of Practice on victim support systems. And this really highlights the need and the call for employers to engage with community and national role players in ensuring that there is support throughout the entire process dealing with gender-based violence and harassment. You would have got the flavor from Sia's discussion that quite often employees or victims are failed not by their employer, but often by the police, sometimes by prosecutors, sometimes just by the sheer burden on the system. And there is a call for employers to play a greater role in guiding employees through the full gambit of the system, through having proactive engagements with those role players, having an established communication channel and program with your local police station so that those matters can be seamlessly taken through the program. Engaging with the NPA, making sure that you can help as an employer in gathering information and evidence, identifying witnesses, working with the NPA hand in hand so that balls don't get dropped. Everyone's busy. The system is strained. And as much support that employers can give to the justice system in getting successful prosecutions through can only be a win for everybody, ultimately. And then your incident response protocols. When you have a case, everything we've spoken about up to now is really about eliminating, mitigating, catching things before they happen. And what I haven't highlighted in this discussion is the need to have this consistent communication and focus throughout discussions, communication systems, engagements in the workplace to try and root out and identify what is causing this in the workplace as much as possible and to stop it before it begins. That's ultimately the goal. But until we get there, there will be occasions when there are cases at work or in your immediate communities. What does the Code of Practice then require from employers? Well, firstly, I've mentioned the immediate separation and implementation of safety measures, victim support and referrals, proper investigation. Okay. This is not just about, don't worry, it'll be okay, let's drop you off at the police station. Employers are required to properly investigate these matters themselves, whether that is by having specialist investigators or your internal staff upskilled in doing this, teaming up with external investigators. It'll be horses for courses. Different matters may require different levels of investigation. But investigation is the first point to being able to take the next steps, be it the disciplinary matters that Lizle will talk to or properly supporting the state in bringing these matters to fruition through the judicial process. Proper investigation from the outset and protecting that information. External collaboration, as I've mentioned. And then this goes back ultimately to your risk assessment protocols after every incident, in the same way as we do for pure work-related safety incidents. Once we've identified it, what were the root causes and how can we better manage those root causes to eliminate this from the outset? Are we addressing root causes in the workplace or do we believe that these are community issues? In which case, what role are employers playing in engaging with communities, supporting community outreach programs and communication and perhaps counseling? We know that hurt people hurt people. What role are we playing in supporting community programs to heal the broader hurt?
The last part of our talk, we're going to look at the processes that's available, or if it's not, that should be available for your employees at work. We're going to look at 3 processes. 1, the reporting of incidents of harassment and GBV. Secondly, the investigation of such incidents. And thirdly, the actual disciplinary process that should then follow. Let's first look at the reporting of harassment and GBV incidents at work. Now, when we sit in a sanitized environment like this, or even a more sanitized and formal environment like the CCMA and the Labour Court, we read policies and we think it's a lovely policy, and the policy says, and the Employment Equity Act also says, these incidents must be reported immediately. And victims of harassment and GBV, 99.9% of the time, do not report this immediately. When you go to work, you bring your whole self. All you want to do is do your work well. No one expects to be harassed or for an act of GBV to be perpetrated against them. So in that moment, not one victim has the perfect response. The perfect response is, this is unwanted conduct, it's against the policy, stop doing it. No one has the presence of mind, body, and soul to do it in that moment. So a policy requirement and even the requirement in the Employment Equity Act for incidents like this to be reported immediately, have it in your policy, but no, it doesn't happen. There's been cases where these incidents have been reported months later. It is not a reason then not to record the case, to investigate the matter, and to take appropriate action. The first question that the perpetrator's representative will ask the victim is, why didn't you report it immediately? Why must we believe you 8 months after the time? Nonsense. All right. We have many labor court judgments that actually go into the psychology of why these incidents are not reported immediately. Many victims feel a sense of shame that this has happened to them. Many victims feel, strangely, pity for the perpetrator. We had a case where a victim of harassment didn't report it immediately because the perpetrator and the perpetrator's wife worked with her, and she said she felt sorry for the perpetrator's wife because she's a nice person. There are many things that go into reporting acts of harassment and GBV. Mostly, apart from the sense of shame, employees or victims of these acts, they fear negative consequences. They don't want to disrupt the workplace. So all your policies will say, and the Employment Equity Act will also say, that reporting of these incidents must happen immediately. It doesn't happen immediately. Please do not address such a report if it doesn't happen immediately. All our policies will also probably say it can be reported to the relevant ER or HR department where the employee is stationed. That always also doesn't happen. There are perceptions, rightly or wrongly, about our HR and ER. We all work in heavy unionized environment. We have structures such as WiMSA, and victims of these acts sometimes feel more comfortable to report it to someone else. And then again, it doesn't matter if it's not reported to HR or ER. It is reported. That very brave step has been taken. Please pay attention to the report. Sometimes employees feel more comfortable to report it to a friend or even to someone who's not working with them, and they come to work and they say, this has happened, please help. Whatever report you receive, please accept the report, please record it, and please investigate it. Of course, it is difficult to address anonymous complaints. Many complaints are lodged anonymously on our hotlines or other systems that provide for anonymous reporting. Unfortunately, there's very little we can do about that because we don't know who to ask for information. As Kate has mentioned, perpetrators could be suspended during the investigation. And item 6 is important and becomes vexed. It says any person who receives a report has an obligation to invoke a procedure. I'm sure some of you who are listening or are here with us in the room have been approached by someone who says, friend, this just happened. I don't want to do anything about it. Please don't tell anyone. What do you do? Okay, very, very difficult situation. All we can do is encourage people who receive reports of these incidents, go to someone at work that's part of a formal structure that you trust. That could be HRER, that could be WiMSA, that could be the union, and just say, I've received this report, I don't know what to do. I've been asked to keep it confidential. But please do find a way to encourage people to report it to the structures that are available. 9 and 10 deals with harassment, 8 and 9 deals with harassment between employees and non-employees. If an employee has been a victim of harassment or GBV by a non-employee, like our contractors, like our service providers or visitors at the mines, it must still be reported in exactly the same manner. It's still our employee and our systems are still there to support. If a non-employee reports these acts that have allegedly been committed by one of our employees, again, investigate, take the necessary action. Just because someone is not an employee doesn't mean it doesn't impact our working places. That's reporting. Investigations. Most of you will have sophisticated protection services or security departments at your mines, and some of you will even have especially trained investigators who can investigate these matters. There must please be no undue delay between receiving a complaint and commencing the investigation. The investigation should, or the investigator should obviously be fair and unbiased, and very importantly, it must be conducted on a confidential basis, not just for the benefit of the victim, but also for the benefit of the alleged perpetrator. Unfortunately, false allegations of harassment are also made, and that is why a lot of people do not buy in to harassment and GBV policies at work. People feel threatened by this. They feel that they're going to be falsely accused. It is a reality that we cannot shy away from. False reports do also happen. Hence, the importance of the confidentiality around investigation. If it turns out that the report is false, we do not want anyone to have been labeled with this allegation in an inaccurate manner. Usually, how these investigations go, it starts with interviews, first with the complainant and then with the alleged perpetrator. The investigator collects evidence. This is all kinds of evidence. These are interviews, statements, WhatsApp messages, Teams messages. There may even have to be an inspection in loco, which means that the investigator will have to go to the scene of where this incident happened. The investigator then gives a report. The investigator will say that there is prima facie evidence or not that this incident actually happened. This is not a sanction. This is not the end of a disciplinary process. This is not the investigator saying you are guilty and we now must decide on a sanction. This is a recommendation to HR and or ER to now implement our procedures to test if this actually happened. All right. When a victim reports an incident of harassment or GBV, he or she must be informed that the informal or the formal process can be invoked. This is first and foremost a choice by the victim. All right. Importantly to note, even if a victim says to you, no, I just want an informal process, please, nothing formal. If the incident is serious enough, or if it could cause harm to other employees, you as the employer can still say no, an informal process is not appropriate, a formal process must be implemented. Of course, all cases like the ones that Sia discussed with you require a formal process. There could be cases where an informal process could be appropriate and sometimes result in some healing in the workplace. Many of us are part of group of work WhatsApp groups, and sometimes people just post the most inappropriate jokes on those groups, right? Someone may post a joke thinking it was a joke, no offense intended, but it offends us. It offends a male, it offends a female, or any other gender. Sometimes through an informal process, like facilitated mediation, like conversation, that could be addressed. Education can happen, apologies can happen, and a better understanding of one another can happen with an appropriate sanction, and then we move on. That is in an informal process, but sometimes a formal process is required. A formal process must be followed where a victim elects a formal process. As I said, even if a victim does not elect a formal process, you as the employer may still decide this warrants a formal process, especially if there's a significant risk of harm to other people in the workplace. What a formal process will require is that there must be a formal written statement by the victim. All right. Then, of course, the disciplinary processes will follow. I'm not going to go into the detail of a disciplinary process. You all know that. What is worth mentioning is that because many victims do not want to be in the same room as the perpetrator, they do not want to face off, they don't want to keep on telling their story over and over and over again, there are ways to address it. Please do not think that a disciplinary hearing is always a cold room with a chairperson, representatives, and people cross-examining one another. As Sia said in the Mchweu case, it was conducted by way of written representations where you avoid all of this. It still meets the requirement of procedural fairness set in the Labour Relations Act.
From my side, I just want to know, sometimes we do have employees whereby they have been sexually abused or in any kind of way, they are scared to raise their voice. Maybe it could be due to the person is a respectful person and has power and money and is also well connected. And the other thing, you'll find that the employee will also be scared to lose their jobs. And how do we deal with that situation when it comes to that point? Thank you.
I think first of all is training and education of all our employees so that they know where they can go to in the event of something that this happens, that they know that they're not dependent on their reporting line, that there's outside lines like HR, like ER, like the unions, like WiMSA, that they can go to for support. Apart from education on the policies, I think it's important to educate vulnerable employees of any gender on the assistance that will then be provided. Because it's one thing to say to someone, here's a policy, here's the link on the intranet, read it. It's a whole different ballgame if they know that there's actual and real support. It's like Kate said, it's not just a pamphlet with a number on it. And then, of course, if someone has taken the step, notwithstanding being so scared to report it, is the protection, the actual support that happens then thereafter. Physically, there can be a separation of the two people in the workplace. If needed, there can be a suspension. If needed, there can be counseling, trauma counseling, all that kind of support. It does start with education, training, and letting people know that there's something that can be done and that they must know what is it that will be done, that they won't be left out in the dark or on their own when something is done. So my take is that it all starts with that communication and education. I think first of all is training and education of all our employees so that they know where they can.
My question is around the reporting process and I think the obligation that we all have towards supporting victims. So you mentioned that everyone who gets a report has an obligation to invoke a procedure. And I would like you to also just touch on that liability. I mean, if someone comes to me and I'm not really equipped, yes, I've been trained through the company, training processes and all of that, but I don't feel confident enough to for the same reasons that the victim may not be able to report, to do the same. Is there any liability on me? Is there any liability on bystanders as well?
I've seen many, to speak to your question about liability, I've seen that many policies include a statement. It's quite a harsh statement, but it's included to say that if you are the witness of these incidents or if it has been reported to you and you do nothing about it, action may be taken against you. Practically, I've never ever seen that happen. And I think it will be absolutely extreme cases where that happen. And it will probably only ever be invoked where it is your specialist person, your HR, your ER person who's been appointed to deal with these reports and then don't do anything about it. With regards to what WiMSA does and must do, I don't know if anyone from WiMSA maybe wants to respond.
We take it back to the mining houses. And I mean, the relationships that we build within the different players in the industry, it's our obligation to tell someone about it. Whether someone does something with that information is an entirely different story. I've had experiences where I've gone to a specific mining house, one of the big ones, and the answer that I got back was, oh, well, why didn't they just come to us? Full stop, end of story. So how much more are we supposed to do from that perspective as well? It gets very difficult. So we listen, we try and give guidance. We've done a lot of work with Webbers in the past where we've been able to connect dots for people to get further advice if they need. And then we raise it further, but it stops again. And that's the frustrating part for, I think, most of us is, then what?
So I've got an example here, in the mining environment, then you find that we have our employees living in the in the residential area, wherein, of course, both women and men live there. So that, of course, then romantic relationships do take place, and then it is known now that there is this perpetrator, that abuses this woman, and for whatever reason, for reasons, in fact, that are known to most of us, then when a person is used to being abused, then chooses not to report. But it's a cultural issue now, because there are people around that witness all of these things, and also women around, of course, that won't feel that they are safe if there is a perpetrator that does this, and they know that this perpetrator does these things. They might not have physical evidence, but they know, they hear, they have, they have heard a lot of things. They've heard screams and so forth. Now, from an employer point of view, having done all the necessary in terms of policies, correct processes, as well as training and so forth, but still you have such a matter, because they do happen. So what would be your advice?
That in some instances, an employer can step in and address acts of harassment and GBV outside of the workplace. And the regulatory framework that Kate has discussed also imposes that duty on the employer. What the framework and the policies and the laws do, however, is that it says deal with this in the world of work, and insofar it impacts the world of work. So obviously, if something is reported, you can investigate and you can deal with it. If something is not reported, but it impacts work, in other words, it flows from something outside inside. Either it damages the employer's reputation, or it negatively affects working relationship. This is what you would all know as off-duty misconduct, right? Then an employer can step in and do what is necessary. It is very difficult for an employer to step in to something which, to use your words, is a community issue, or something that is kept silent, if some of those factors do not spill into the world of work. I don't know if Kate wants to add to this, but what I can suggest is that the networks and the support structures be initiated. And it doesn't have to necessarily be an employer investigation, but the structures that are available, the police or private structures, can be contacted for assistance on a confidential basis.
The employer could also consider assisting that particular employee to pursue some form of harassment order, pressing criminal charges, assisting them with writing that statement. Employers do that, and the Domestic Violence Act actually calls upon communities to assist victims of domestic violence to act on those situations. So the employer could do that, speak to the victim, say, let us help you, at the very least, get you out of that particular situation.
The second one, could you please clarify the typical time frame for the investigation and resolution of a GBVF case?
Just firstly, to deal with the first one, just to add on the minor accommodation. The minor accommodation itself may actually also constitute a workplace in terms of the harassment code. Remember, the harassment code has a very wide definition of what constitutes a workplace. And because it is linked to the workplace, it may then, by definition, be a workplace, and the employer is entitled to invoke those policies in a particular instance. And if that particular perpetrator works for the mine and not just the spouse, the employer is rightfully entitled to take the action if the information then comes to them about that harassment of GBV.
So my question relates to, after all of that has happened, there has been a case of GBV or any other form of harassment. The investigations have happened. If the perpetrator has been found guilty, then necessary interventions has been applied. I just want to hear from the different clients that you have, what type of support systems, after all of that has happened, what type of support systems are offered that have been formalized to say, we know you have gone through this, yes, you need healing. These are the interventions that the company has to offer to assist you to overcome the experience that you would have had to go through.
To me, just thank you for the question. Just to add on to the mine accommodation issue, the Code of Practice in eliminating harassment at work actually lists places that could be workplaces where this code applies and where our policies must apply. And one of these workplaces is employer provided accommodation, which includes housing. So our codes will apply in mine accommodation. With regards to this question, I wonder if it wouldn't be better answered by the delegates in the room. Our involvement usually ends at the time of sanction.
Yeah, how long the investigation? The second question.
The legislation doesn't prescribe how long it must take. Of course, justice delayed is justice denied, and all your disciplinary codes and your policies will have paragraphs that say it should be done as soon as reasonably possible. Some of them are done very quickly, and some unfortunately take months. It depends on the nature of it. Sometimes it's an easier investigation, but sometimes the investigation becomes complicated. What happens a lot is that either the victim or the perpetrator go on extended sick leave, which delays investigations. So there's no legal or policy set absolute time limit for the investigations to finish.
I just wanted to ask, because I understand that when it comes to accused employees, obviously there's a degree of confidentiality that is applied when investigating such cases. But where there's been an instance of false accusation, what can we do to strike a balance between obviously not preventing or discouraging victims from coming forward, but also protecting other employees against false accusations, and what recourses can be put in place where it is found after an investigation that a report was false?
Such a vexed situation. I'm just going to stand up so that I can see you there. When we draft these policies with our clients, it is always a debate on whether you add into the policy that a false allegation of harassment or GBV is misconduct in itself and may lead to disciplinary action. Why is this such a debate? Because just having a sentence like that in a policy could deter victims with real complaints to report this, because it is always a he said, she said, he said situation. And a victim may read this and think, but no one's going to believe me, and then I'm going to be disciplined. Many employers, however, choose to have such a paragraph or principle in their policies because it's important to protect all our employees. In as much as we protect employees from harassment and GBV, people who could be accused of such things falsely must also be protected. So I think false claims of harassment, especially, I haven't seen a false claim of GBV, are very prevalent, and it is something that requires significant attention. That is also something that should be eradicated. I haven't seen, and maybe this is also a topic for discussion during the break amongst ourselves, but I haven't seen any finding or any disciplinary action being taken against someone who made a false claim. In fact, I've seen it only once at a platinum mine. I don't know if you have examples of that, but it truly is a vexed issue because there's also a deterring factor in that for victims who have real complaints.
Our next speaker, Craig Wilkinson, will talk to us about positive masculinity and how we can amplify men's allyship and co-create a culture of safety, support, and dignity within our workplaces.
Really bad. We have, I think the latest stats are 63% of boys and girls are growing up without a present engaged biological father in the house. Tragedy, tragedy. Mothers are doing a phenomenally heroic job, aren't they? Single moms holding the fort. Almost an impossible job, you know, without the emotional and financial support of the father to hold down two jobs to try and raise kids. Absent fathers are causing major havoc in our nation, not teaching boys how to be men. What does a boy do when he grows up without a good male role model? He looks to the gangster on the corner of the street. He looks to a rap artist that's living a completely profligate life. Where does he look? He looks to his peers, hormonal teenagers who know nothing about manhood. You know, young boys need older men to model to them what it means to be a man. So this journey from boy to man is a perilous journey, perilous journey. As I said earlier, with power comes responsibility. Physical strength is a sacred responsibility to use that strength only for good. Economic strength, sacred responsibility. What am I doing with my resources? They say you can judge what a man values by how he spends his money and how he spends his time. You say you value your family, but you're spending the whole entire weekend on the golf course. What do you actually, do you value golf more than your family? Where are you when you need it? And so a lot of men grow up wounded. Number two reason why men abuse. And when I talk about reasons, I'm not talking excuses. There's a fundamental difference between a reason and an excuse. There are never excuses. There's never, ever an excuse for a man to abuse a woman in any way, ever. No matter what she says, what she does, no matter how drunk I am, no matter what my upbringing, there's no excuse. Reasons help us to deal with the root causes so that we can fix the problem. Remember, we want to fix and change and transform the hearts and minds of men and behavior of men so that they don't abuse. We don't want to be a society that has to spend billions on helping victims. We want to be a society that prevents victims from ever happening, from men from ever abusing. We don't want to, a lot of work on gender-based violence is focused on number one, creating awareness, and number two, helping victims. Now, both are absolutely crucial. We need to do everything we possibly can to help victims. We need to do everything we can to create awareness, but that's not enough. We need to look at what's causing this and how can we stop it so that we don't have abuse. And the key is to transform and change the hearts, minds, perceptions, behavior of men. Because if we get that right, we get everything right. Law enforcement, and this is such a tragic thing. So often a woman will go to a police station to report an incident. What's the first question she gets asked by the constable taking thing is what did you do? Or what were you wearing? Or what did you say? Victim blaming. It's terrible. And so often the very policemen who are tasked with protecting women are themselves abusers. So, that's why law is not enough. Law and law enforcement is not enough. We have to look at the people who man the system, who are in the system. Those HR directors, those colleagues that we have that are looking at the policies and the procedures, what is their heart? What is their behavior? What is their mindset? If their value system is right, those laws will become nice to have, but not necessary. And that's really what we want to do. So we got to look at this. Now, if you look at, and I said there are 4 reasons why men abuse. One is wounded masculinity. And we talked about where that woundedness comes from. Number 2, false concepts about what it means to be a man. I talked about those 4 false concepts: sex, power, money, big boys don't cry. True masculinity, I've written a book called The 6-Pack of Masculine Virtues, and we do that. And I talk about 6 virtues that make a man. And I say 6-pack because every man wants a 6-pack, but the most important one is not this one, it's the one inside, the characters. Number 1, true masculinity uses its strength for good. It never fails to use its strength. All it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. It never misuses its strength. It's never aggressive. It uses its strength only for good. To love, serve, honor, protect, provide. Number 2, true masculinity judges itself by character and not by image. It's not the car you drive, the clothes you wear. Someone said a beautiful thing. They said, the poorest man can leave behind the richest legacy. Because it's not what you leave for someone, it's what you leave in somebody. So we judge ourselves by character, by our value system, by our behavior, by what effect am I having on my wife and my children and my community. Number 3, we take responsibility. True masculinity never abandons responsibility. It takes full responsibility for its own health, well-being, the well-being of its family, the loved ones, resources, roles, and responsibilities. Number 4, true masculinity forms the bands of brothers. The research shows that most men are lonely. We have someone we can watch a game with, drink a Zamalek with, but we don't have men that truly know us and get us and we can share with and hold us accountable. We need that. Number 5, men mentor the next generation. True masculinity lives a life that's worth copying, that's worth emulating, that the footprints I'm leaving lead to the right place. How much time do I have? Okay, none. And number 6, true masculinity makes the world a better place. You can judge the character of a man by looking at the people in his life. What impact does he have on them? His society, his community. True masculinity always makes the world a better place. I'll just give you three quick solutions. The solution to transforming the behavior and the hearts of men. Number 1 is to bring healing. And we use a thing called healing dialogues. We do a lot of work in communities around South Africa. We get men in small groups. We promote dialogue. Dialogue amongst men heals because men have grown up not talking. Number 2, we teach positive masculinity. We teach them, we become the voice of the father they never had, teaching them what it means to be a man. It's not about power, it's about service and love and care. And number 3, we form bands of brothers, which are groups of men who hold each other accountable to a higher standard. To me, I better shut up now. Thank you so much more to say, but really bad. We have, I think the latest stats are 63% of boys and girls are growing up without a present engaged biological father in the house. Tragedy. Mothers are doing a phenomenally heroic job, aren't they? Single moms holding the fort. Almost an impossible job, without the emotional and financial support of the father to hold down 2 jobs to try and raise kids. Absent fathers are causing major havoc in our nation, not teaching boys how to be men. What does a boy do when he grows up without a good male role model? He looks to the gangster on the corner of the street. He looks to a rap artist that's living a completely profligate life. Where does he look? He looks to his peers, hormonal teenagers who know nothing about manhood. Young boys need older men to model to them what it means to be a man. So this journey from boy to man is a perilous journey. As I said earlier, with power comes responsibility. Physical strength is a sacred responsibility to use that strength only for good. Economic strength, sacred responsibility. What am I doing with my resources? They say you can judge what a man values by how he spends his money and how he spends his time. You say you value your family, but you're spending the whole entire weekend on the golf course. What do you actually, do you value golf more than your family? Where are you when you need it? And so a lot of men grow up wounded. Number two reason why men abuse. And when I talk about reasons, I'm not talking excuses. There's a fundamental difference between a reason and an excuse. There are never excuses. There's never, ever an excuse for a man to abuse a woman in any way, ever. No matter what she says, what she does, no matter how drunk I am, no matter what my upbringing, there's no excuse. Reasons help us to deal with the root causes so that we can fix the problem. Remember, we want to fix and change and transform the hearts and minds of men and behavior of men so that they don't abuse. We don't want to be a society that has to spend billions on helping victims. We want to be a society that prevents victims from ever happening, from men from ever abusing. We don't want to, a lot of work on gender-based violence is focused on number one, creating awareness, and number two, helping victims. Now, both are absolutely crucial. We need to do everything we possibly can to help victims. We need to do everything we can to create awareness, but that's not enough. We need to look at what's causing this and how can we stop it so that we don't have abuse. And the key is to transform and change the hearts, minds, perceptions, behavior of men. Because if we get that right, we get everything right. Law enforcement, and this is such a tragic thing. So often a woman will go to a police station to report an incident. What's the first question she gets asked by the constable taking thing is what did you do? Or what were you wearing? Or what did you say? Victim blaming. It's terrible. And so often the very policemen who are tasked with protecting women are themselves abusers. So, that's why law is not enough. Law and law enforcement is not enough. We have to look at the people who man the system, who are in the system. Those HR directors, those colleagues that we have that are looking at the policies and the procedures. What is their heart? What is their behavior? What is their mindset? If their value system is right, those laws will become nice to have, but not necessary. And that's really what we want to do. So we got to look at this. Now, if you look at, and I said there are 4 reasons why men abuse. One is wounded masculinity. And we talked about where that woundedness comes from. Number 2, false concepts about what it means to be a man. I talked about those 4 false concepts: sex, power, money, big boys don't cry. True masculinity, I've written a book called The 6-Pack of Masculine Virtues, and we do that. And I talk about 6 virtues that make a man. And I say 6-pack because every man wants a 6-pack, but the most important one is not this one, it's the one inside, the characters. Number 1, true masculinity uses its strength for good. It never fails to use its strength. All it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. It never misuses its strength. It's never aggressive. It uses its strength only for good. To love, serve, honor, protect, provide. Number 2, true masculinity judges itself by character and not by image. It's not the car you drive, the clothes you wear. Someone said a beautiful thing. They said, the poorest man can leave behind the richest legacy. Because it's not what you leave for someone, it's what you leave in somebody. So we judge ourselves by character, by our value system, by our behavior, by what effect am I having on my wife and my children and my community. Number 3, we take responsibility. True masculinity never abandons responsibility. It takes full responsibility for its own health, well-being, the well-being of its family, the loved ones, resources, roles, and responsibilities. Number 4, true masculinity forms the bands of brothers. The research shows that most men are lonely. We have someone we can watch a game with, drink a Zamalek with, but we don't have men that truly know us and get us and we can share with and hold us accountable. We need that. Number 5, men mentor the next generation. True masculinity lives a life that's worth copying, that's worth emulating, that the footprints I'm leaving lead to the right place. How much time do I have? Okay, none. And number 6, true masculinity makes the world a better place. You can judge the character of a man by looking at the people in his life. What impact does he have on them? His society, his community. True masculinity always makes the world a better place. I'll just give you three quick solutions. The solution to transforming the behavior and the hearts of men. Number 1 is to bring healing, and we use a thing called healing dialogues.
We are moving on to the next item on our program today, our panel discussion. I'd like to call up Dolly Mazibuko. Dolly is the Culture and Inclusion and Development Manager at Valterra. And I will also call up our panelists who are going to be partaking in the discussion today. Please come up, Raksha Naidoo, Fatima Collins, Louw Snyman, and Craig again. Thank you very much.
As to be introduced, me briefly, my name is Dolly Mazibuko. I am from Valterra Platinum, and I do lead the inclusion and diversity space. And essentially, the work around GBV falls within my portfolio. I think from Valterra Platinum, we were bold. We went into this really boldly and just ran with the work, and there's a lot of learning. So I'm really privileged that we get together today because there's really been a lot of insightful kind of information shared, but also just some of the questions are kind of segues into what we'll be discussing this morning. So I've got an incredible panelist with me here, really very knowledgeable, and really thank you so much for your willingness to participate in this as well. Maybe let me start off by introducing the panelists, and I see they're sitting in a different order, but it's all okay. We've got Raksha Naidoo, right? Raksha is the Chief Executive Officer of the Particle Group, and also serves as the WiMSA Chairperson. Outgoing still? Outgoing, all right, cool. But also a board member of the Mineral and Petroleum Board. So thank you so much, Raksha, and welcome. I know you've got a great passion, for anything gender transformation, women. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you today. Craig, shall we repeat everything about you? But I know you also serve, or rather work as an independent consultant, supporting mining houses and really bringing the role of men as allies in the work of gender-based violence. And it's touching on some of the stuff you shared with us. So we're really looking at giving you more airtime, I promise, since we cut you a bit short, because that role of males is really essential in this work. We've also got Fatima Collins. Fatima is a woman in mining regional head at Sibanye. Also really very passionate around gender equity, and you dedicate a lot of your career or time even to the career development of women, and just making sure they're able to navigate their space in mining, which can be so complex. Lastly, but certainly not least, and I nudged me, I'm like, it's Louis here. I haven't seen Louis, so great seeing you, Louis. Louis is a group manager holding the title of Group Human Rights, Cultural Heritage, Preservation, Community Health for Glencore, right? SA Operations, a very long title. Hopefully it comes with big bucks as well. All right, so I guess let's get into it. Like I said, I feel like a lot of the questions, or rather even the interactions that we started off with, has been a really good segue into what we want to be discussing today. And perhaps just to start off with some context that was set around, it's very clear that mining has an obligation to this. It's not an optional thing, both legally but morally as well, right? And I think there's been a lot of good policy, laws that aid mining houses right now in terms of reinforcing our responsibilities around this. I mean, the very recent GBVF notice guideline, which we all kind of, I hope we are somewhat complying to it. I think it gives a good outline on where to start as mining houses. So I think we all quite understanding that yes, GBV is actually a safety hazard. It's not a question of where do we place it anymore. However, what I've come to notice is placing it within the realm of safety, it also requires a very leader-led approach. So this can't be the role of safety alone. This definitely can't be the role of HR, right? So a very leader-led approach is required in that regard. And I think we must also be cognizant is there's still a journey to be traveled, probably by leaders and organization in this space. I mean, it's a very new phenomenon. I think it's always been there. We're just amplifying the issue right now. And with that comes resources that are required, budget that are required. So in a very immature world, to any organization that really hasn't immersed itself in the impact of this, it could be deemed as a bit of a cost burden. And what do we know about the space? I mean, why are we talking gender-based violence and so on in at work, right? And I'm speaking really from a level of immature organizations. I think we've fairly progressed beyond that. So I think, Raksha, maybe the first question to you, how do we kind of travel this journey with leaders, right? Getting them to really appreciate that in order for them to run safe operations, this squarely falls, within their lap. But also, I also feel like there also needs to be some capabilities that we need to build for leaders to be able to confidently handle this, because it is a new phenomenon and it can be quite daunting when you don't even know where to start. So how do we build that leadership capability, but also really get them to understand this is absolutely your responsibility? Yeah.
Well, if you know me well enough, I should just disclaim it at the beginning. I'm probably going to drop some F-bomb at some point, so forgive me, right? To be very blunt, leaders need to just fucking do it. We need to step up and we need to stop making excuses, and we need to do it. It is not HR's responsibility. It is not health and safety's responsibility. And if we don't start at the top and work our way down, nothing is ever going to happen. Whether it's safety, it's corporate culture, it's anything, if we don't have it embedded, truly embedded into our organizations, nothing is going to get done. I think too many leaders look at it as an irritation. Too many leaders look at it as, oh, you know, this is somebody else's problem. I don't need to do it. It's a one-liner in a board report that probably doesn't even get tabled and discussed. And so we can try as much as we all are blue in the face, but if it doesn't start to actually become something real that people are living within their organizations from the top down, nothing ever changes. You know, some of our interactions at WiMSA is when we hear, like, I've listened to so many leaders in the mining house talk about, you know, the incredible programs that they have. Okay. And I always wondered to myself, do you think he knew this before this presentation, or is this something he actually was involved in? Because when people come to us and they tell us some of their stories, and my God, there are scary stories that come all of the time. And to Lizle's point, people come to WiMSA to talk about what's going on because they've got no other outlets. And yet, a couple of days ago or somewhere on social media, you've seen some CEO tell this incredible story about these wonderful, excuse me, you see, I'm saying something true, right? There's some transformation story that is out there that they've done because they've made all these bold changes from a GBV perspective. But how is it that the guys on the floor have got no idea what it's about? How is it that this is not really lived and translated all the way through? And so people come because they desperately need the support because leaders or leadership are not doing what they need to be doing. And as much as there's a requirement or a desire for it to happen from a CEO perspective or board perspective, I mean, leadership is through various different ranks, right? Some of the leaders at different levels are the culprits. Some of them are the ones driving the challenge of keeping things quiet. Some of them have got a really good friend that sits in HR that's actually going to just brush it under the rug for them. I don't know, like it just seems so ridiculous when you think about it. But leadership 100% need to be trained. Leaders also need to be held accountable. It needs to be a KPI on a CEO's, I don't know, job description, or his bonus should be linked to it, like all of the above. Because at the end of the day, gender-based violence, harassment in every single form will affect your bottom line if you have got downtime, if you've got your staff that are not capable of doing what they need to do, your staff don't want to come to work to do what they need to do. So there needs to be like some real accountability, and money talks with a lot of people if you're driving accountability. So I feel like it's got to be tangibly linked and associated somewhere. And then absolutely there needs to be proper training done. The work that Webber's described is incredible, but it's not just a seminar that you sit in to tick a box. I've signed my register. I'm here. I've done what I need to do. I can forget about it when I go back on site. No, like, how are we then following it up, and how are we actually doing what we need to do as all forms of leadership in the organization?
100% agree with that. And I think that GBVF notice then is kind of aiding in that direction because it's got that component around leadership accountability. What's the business strategy linked to that? But certainly for me, you also don't just want to do it because there's money linked to it. I really think we need to think intentionally around how we recruit, right? You want to recruit leaders who've got the right moral intent around this.
Yeah, and isn't this the entire, I mean, the entire ethos of the future female leaders, right? I mean, like, this is a continuous conversation. And again, I think the Webber's team spoke about the level of empathy that's required and has to be overlaid upon all of this. And unfortunately, far too many male leaders don't have that because people don't see the soft skill as a necessary skill of leadership. The world is evolving so drastically. And if we don't evolve with it, everyone's going to get left behind. Empathy is almost like a mandated standard, utter and complete requirement of any leader today. And it's not, empathy is not something you can fake. Empathy is not something that you can be taught. It's something that you feel it. And if we don't start feeling things really for what they are, whether it's culture, whether it's the impact of harassment, whether it's anything, nothing will truly translate. So this is why as well, future females or female leadership of the future, I hate using the word female leadership, it's leadership. But female leadership is going to make the fundamental difference and the change that the industry requires. And we cannot be putting people into those boxes to tick the box, oh, I need a female leader, tick, my quota is tick. No, it's being doing it for the right reason. And then training and advocacy and all of that becomes so much easier because you've got the right people doing what needs to be done and driving it.
Thanks, Raksha, and spot on, absolutely. And she's a bit ahead, and she's almost tempting me to probe another question at her, but I'll leave it for a bit later. So this was really around leadership, right? And Louw, I know you play a crucial role in terms of the establishment and ensuring that Tutuzela care centers are quite functional and operating well within the communities that Glencore operates within. I mean, we've heard it multiple times here to say our mining gates are certainly permeable. You know, some of these behaviors is stuff that is happening in our community, and we can't deny that, right? So we definitely, at the rate that we scaling and pacing ourselves in terms of trying to transform our own internal employees, we certainly need to keep that external outlook. But in terms of the community lens, I was wondering, what would a grassroots level impact approach be? Obviously, one that takes the external stakeholders along and internal stakeholders, you know, the whole ecosystem of mining in order to really make an impact in this space.
The short answer is trust. And I think we've come a long way, but we're not there yet.
if you look at where the mining industry has come from, and you look at the trust deficit that's been ingrained within the mining industry within the last 100 years, how do you change that? And there's a lot of what you've said about the programs that are out there, but why are we doing them? Are we intentional? What is the intention of supporting these programs and investing millions and millions of rand? These are not small funds that are being contributed. These are hundreds of millions of rands that are being contributed. If we're going to do this, and we're going to do this properly, we need to know why we're doing it. And I think, for me, it's about leadership. It's about owning your space as well. But in the same breath, it's about being honest with yourself. So we speak about external versus internal. You cannot tell people what to do if you don't have your own house in order. So often you will go, I know what's best. This is what the sector needs. A little bit of a preach that goes on. But what are you doing internally? How are you changing your own system? And I think there's lessons to be learned there. And I think when you engage honestly and you try and build that trust, it makes you vulnerable as well, because you're opening the doors to your business. You're allowing people behind the veil to see. And I think there was perhaps sectorally quite a lot of, I would say, shame attached to, we all know what the stats say about mining host communities and about the elevated levels of GBV, femicide that occurs there. And you cannot divorce yourself from the linkage between that. So there's a positive obligation. And we have the lawyers in the room. We know Section 8.2 of the Constitution as well. You cannot divorce yourself as a company from your constitutional obligations. It's clear that if we are going to do this and we are going to develop programs, it needs to be an entire ecosystem approach, as you've said there. In this, from a CSI point of view, are you developing programs that create situations where there's financial independence for women-owned businesses? Are you thinking about what does your procurement system look like? What does your engagement look like? Are there silenced voices within your engagement? Another unfortunate reality is that within the context that we operate, patriarchy still plays a distinct role within those systems. How do you win hearts and minds? I'm not talking about breaking down. I'm talking about developing the next leaders within those communities, the next man allies, the next people that are going to drive the collective kind of engagement that happens between a community and a mining company. We've come a long way. And I think that ecosystem that you speak about, this idea that sexual harassment, sexual assault is an HR issue. That's another thing that really gets to me. And as a human rights practitioner, and I must say thank you to Glencore for letting me in, because often you're from the outside, and you as a human rights professional, you often banging at the door and you don't get to change the things from the inside. I think that's exactly the same, where people think that human rights is not cross-functional. The last thing I'll say is that this is a human rights issue. We are speaking about issues where, if we don't think about this from a survivor-led approach, a survivor-focused approach, then we haven't even gotten out the gates yet. So I think it's this cross-functional approach. It's about embedding your systems. It's about understanding that every single decision that you make, particularly from a senior management level, has an impact, and it sends a message. And people pick up on messages very, very quickly in this sector. How you speak, who you speak to, and who you don't speak to. So I think it permeates the entire sector. And if I could give one piece of advice that I've learned as someone relatively new within the corporate sector, coming from civil society, I can say that a lot of good work is being done, but there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. I think the fundamental thing that I'm picking up on is an aspect of trust. And we know why trust is eroded between mining companies and the communities. So yeah, we need to see how we continue to try to restore that trust, and it's really seeking to what we say, right? Okay. Maybe Craig, let me move over to you because we speak a bit about the community aspect. Communities are obviously made up of individuals who forge families and so on, and you kind of laid a bit of context around that in terms of what you spoke to earlier. So within the family structure, there would obviously need to be some transformation that needs to happen in this space, right? I mean, we speak around gender-based violence being highly rooted in cultural norms, just how we've been conditioned and grown up. So there needs to be some rehabilitation that happens in that space, similar to what I was asking around the community lens. So I guess I want to get to an aspect around the intersectionality as well that gender-based violence brings forth, right? So a lot of the time, and you touched on it a bit around cycles of trauma, boys having been exposed to this, but there's varying degrees of vulnerability as well when it comes to gender-based violence. I mean, girls are also exposed to this, and we appreciate what our stats tell us, that yes, the focus is on women and children, but the other underrepresented groups, if we think of persons with disability, and we might think of the LGBTQI+ community, I mean, they suffer harsh crimes of hate crimes, corrective rape crimes, and all of that. So there's varying degrees of vulnerability around that. And dare I say, but I think we've spoken about it a bit here, I hope nobody throws a shoe at me, but men can be victims as well, right? And it's just something that we don't fully talk about, right? Men certainly can be victims. So I think, Craig, I want to ask, perhaps, how do we start creating those so safe spaces? And I think we probably didn't give you big enough room in your speak to start hearing men talk around their traumas and being exposed to violence and potentially how then it manifests into their adult life. Yeah.
Huge question. Look, I think, as Louis said, this is a human issue. And identity politics is a very dangerous game, because as soon as we put someone in a box and we make that more important than humanity, we made a big mistake. You know, we dehumanize. You know, before I'm a man, I'm a human being. Before I'm a South African, a Christian, whatever else is my identity, I'm a human being, and that's the fundamental basis of who I am. So we need to stop demonizing any particular group and start focusing very much on us as human beings. And then, in addition to that, focus on empathy. We're not all in the same boat. You know, I mean, someone said during COVID that we're all in the same boat, and it's nonsense. We're all in the same environmental boat, but some would live in a mansion in Bryanston, some in a shack in Alex, you know. So they're in the same national environment, but the circumstance is very, very different. So we're not all in the same boat. And I think it's a matter of those of us who have privilege using that in a very empowering and humble way. And those who don't, and privilege comes in very many forms. You know, I can come from a wealthy household, but an abusive family. So I'm underprivileged. Even though I have access to money, I'm being abused by my father. I mean, I'm underprivileged. You can have someone who comes from a poor background, but has a beautiful environment in which they're loved and cared for. In some ways, they have more privilege than that. So we got to look differently at privilege and vulnerability. And, you know, I think it was Gandhi who said that you can judge a society by how they treat its most vulnerable. And so we have to get to a point where we view each other as humans. We are aware of our privilege or lack thereof, and we create an environment in which we protect the vulnerable, we utilize the privilege, and we create an environment where everybody can thrive. Now, that sounds like an ideal utopian thing. I think that's very much what your background is, isn't it? You know, human rights, how do we do it? But going to the masculine thing, boys are struggling. You know, I do a lot of work in schools, and boys are really struggling. You know, I asked boys, are you proud to be a man? And some of them said, would you tweet that? No. Why not? No, it'd be cancelled. And I think, well, how can you cancel someone for being a man? Because so we've got to stop demonizing masculinity, but we also at the same time have to hold accountable bad behavior. You know, it's this whole thing of grace, but also truth, love and truth working and operating together. And we basically need more men who are not afraid of being vulnerable. You see, the best way I can get Colin to be vulnerable is for me to be vulnerable to him. I give him permission to do that, you know. And so the more we raise up men who are leading the way with vulnerability and modeling positive, healthy masculinity and seeing women as equal co-creators, that's going to change the narrative. The more we have leaders who are, you know, alpha males, dominant men, and that goes back to what you're saying about leadership. You know, leaders have to play the role of being humble servant leaders, giving permission to others to do that.
So I think the key takeaway from what I'm hearing here is, I think because of the stats, we tend to think of gender-based violence as purely a female problem, right? Because that's what the stats tell us. But I mean, it's a human rights for everyone, you know, everybody deserves for their dignity to be protected. And I think we need to think of it in that manner, you know, to really open room and space for men to be vulnerable if their dignity is also being violated. So I think that's a shift that we also need to try to think of as we approach the work around the eradication. Raksha, I'm going to go back to you because you spoke a bit around females, leadership, and obviously within mining, we are creating these spaces for women to come in. I mean, we've got our employment equity targets and so on, and obviously the aspiration is to see women in leadership roles, right? But women walk into these spaces and they're obviously learning from male leaders as well, right? Learning good and probably not the good, and they might be tempted in some aspects to mirror, how men lead and so on, that masculinity and whatnot. So I want to bring in here a bit of talk around bullying, harassment, and victimization, because it is quite linked to gender-based violence. I think the commonality between BHV and gender-based violence is both are rooted in some power dynamic, either misuse of power, and I think you spoke around misuse of power and so forth. So when we think of leaders, female leaders stepping into these roles, and obviously you're jumping into a big role, you want to have impact, and I think words like you need to assert yourself sometimes can be misconstrued for being aggressive and whatnot. So they kind of embody that. What do you take on a growing phenomenon, which I've picked up on certainly when you look at some of the bullying harassment cases on female bullying? Right, because it could happen, right? But also secondly, maybe if we look at it in the context of gender-based violence, and I think there was a gentleman who spoke about it earlier, around it might have been normalized also, in mining so much that if you get a female who dare report a supervisor, they get bullied because how dare you take away the bread that feeds us or so forth. So how do we, kind of think of that aspect of bullying, harassment? I mean, yeah, bullying, harassment and victimization, but specifically female on female bullying.
I mean, it's a reality. It happens all the time. I've got more than one story of my encounter with being bullied by another female. And I think it's probably one of the saddest things out there, because what are we doing? Like, why are we mean? We're mean girls. It's awful. It's really, really disgusting. And when you look at it from the other layer that you've just described, I mean, it's also a case of when someone has experienced, and again, this is from stories that we've had told to us, when someone's experienced, whether it's rape or bullying or harassment or whatever underground, and then the other females that are working in the team have said to individuals, oh, now you're going to make it bad for all of us. Now you're going to create a problem for all of us. And then they literally mean girl against her. And then people get bullied and tortured for it. And now you're excluded from conversations. You're not part of the work that needs to be done. And this is a big reason as to why so many women leave this industry, because they don't feel safe, because it's not just feeling unsafe against men or from men, but women as well. And it happens from underground into the boardroom. It's all there. The patriarchy has probably created the scarcity of seats at the table or opportunities that exist. And some women just feel like, no ways, I'm going to protect this at all costs, and whoever comes in my path, so help me God. And that's bred this ugly culture and this ugly trait in women, where we end up fighting against each other instead of, helping one another actually do better. I've seen so many cases where, WiMSA was created as this platform that creates a better world for women in mining. And it's about how do we showcase the great examples of positive female leadership. And you don't have to be a CEO to be a positive female leader. It's varying different degrees of leadership or management. And we love sharing stories so that others can learn from it. But it's those women who get there and they're like, no ways, like I can't share this. And when you hear the stories of the bullying and harassment, and you realize that it's over the silliest, simplest, most stupidest things, and yet we all will put these beautiful posts on LinkedIn, oh no, we lift as we rise. Bullshit. Not everybody's doing that. The reality is that we're out there like hunting for these like icons of industry. There aren't that many of them. I mean, how many female CEOs like run mining houses right now? What are we down to? 1, 2, right? One, I think it's Kumba, right?
Yeah,
How scary is that? Like, why aren't we seeing more of the faces? And there are some amazing, amazing women out there. So female on female bullying and harassment, it's bullshit. Can we stop? Like, I'm so sick of it. Like, I'm tired of experiencing it myself. Like, and I don't understand why we need to take each other down. We will never get to parity. It's not going to happen. We will never get to a future female-led world if we continue to do this to one another. It's not a case of, oh, I'm going to do it only if Fatima can't do it, or I'll share it with Fatima if it doesn't impact what I'm doing. Crap. It's nonsense. And it just gets worse and worse, because already you've got this scary connotation of what GBV is, and the mining industry is deemed as unsafe because of it. Now you add this other layer of your sister who's meant to be helping you and protecting you and like working with you, becoming the person that's against you as well. It makes it so much harder for us to do anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And it's because your sister's trying to be masculine, right? Because we think that's what's needed to survive. So I guess the issue is, how do we get masculinity, positive masculinity that is, and Craig, this is specifically for you, and femininity to coexist, because we kind of need both, right? And that's what you're speaking to also with the boy child, to say, how do we get them to become more vulnerable, start speaking? That's what we embody as women, and it comes really naturally. So how do we get those to coexist, and one shouldn't be deemed as more superior than the other? And when we think of developing leaders, we think of developing them holistically in that manner, to say there is a time for positive masculinity, but also we want this element on vulnerability. How do we really get to that?
It goes back to leadership and culture. You know, the research. The research clearly shows that men are penalized for so-called feminine behavior, and women are penalized for so-called masculine behavior. So if a woman is assertive, which is a good quality, she's deemed to be bitchy, or, you know, where if a man is vulnerable, he's deemed to be weak. So we got to look at a culture change and say, well, we need men who are nurturing and caring, and we need women who are strong and assertive, and we need to make that okay, because at the moment it's not okay, whether we like it or not. And that's embedded in men and women. Women perceive men who are vulnerable as weak, and men perceive women who are assertive as unpleasant. You know, so we got to begin to shift that. And again, it goes back to leadership. You know, from leadership has to model positive humanity. And you know, men and women are not the same. I mean, equality doesn't mean sameness, and the difference is beautiful. We mustn't try and make men the same as a woman, the same. But there are qualities within a woman that, you know, that are masculine, that need to be applauded, and vice versa. So leadership and culture, and addressing these elephants in the room. You know, we need assertive women, and they're not bitchy and unpleasant. They're being assertive. They're being strong leaders, is what they are. And men, we need them to be able, give them permission to be nurturing. We often say, you know, we want men to be nurturing, but then we punish them for it. We want women to be leaders, but we punish, you know. And I mean, the whole queen bee syndrome, that's what it is, you know. Limited spaces at the table. When a woman does get a space at the table, she's the queen bee, and she's got to protect that space. You know, we got to, these are elephants in the room that we got to just put out there and address 100%. Yeah.
Absolutely, because otherwise we just run this vicious cycle. We then get women at the top, and they are the bullies, and, you know, then it just never works out. Fatima, I'm going to come to you. And really just to talk a bit around some organizational strategies that we should be looking at when we talk of GBV. I think there's been acknowledgement, especially with what Craig landed, to say we need to understand what happened to you. And there's an incredible book by Oprah that actually speaks around what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you, right? So perhaps in looking at both our response and preventative strategies around GBV, how do we think of a balanced and holistic approach? Because currently we're looking at very victim-centric approaches, which is all good. But how do we then start looking at the perpetrator and embedding that within some of our strategies on prevention and response? While still maintaining the zero tolerance and still wanting to apply consequence management, because we don't want to lose that, right? So yes, sure, you're a perpetrator, we somewhat also might want to support you, but if it's wrong, there still needs to be consequence management. So how do we balance that in terms of a very holistic approach?
Thanks, Dolly. You know, when it comes to reporting and systems, we've seen it through the Wentzel presentation. We've seen it through the Man Health and Safety Council on the MCOP for GBV. It's clearly mandated. You know, these are the processes. And Sibanye, like any other organization, and most of the mining houses in this room do all of that. But there's something that goes beyond that, and that's firstly, as Louw said, is trust. So how do you embed trust into a system? How do you ensure that people will report? Because you've got the systems in place, right? So how do you ensure people will report? So firstly, we hear it all the time that women weaponize GBV. You know, how can we trust you? And that mostly is a male narrative. You know, you very seldom hear female saying that, oh, she's probably weaponizing it. So it's always about if you have processes that you can trust, you'd be able to investigate those processes, right? So organizations need to build that trust, and that trust comes from leadership, as Raksha said. We need to have that. And one thing that the financial services sector does better than we do so far is name and shame. So if there's a sexual harassment case and somebody's been convicted, it's known in some of the financial services sector. A photo of that guy goes up. It's on the notice boards, it gets circulated, and they say he's suspended for A, B, and C. So what that tells everybody else in the organization is that if you talk about it, you're okay, and there's consequences for bad behavior. It's in the old days, I was speaking to somebody from the financial services sector. There was a board, notice board. Now it goes out an email. That's the one thing that they do. The other thing that they do is that a lot of the financial services sector has an ethics committee that reports directly into the board. So again, that builds trust in the system, because it doesn't matter how high up in the organization you are, I can talk about you because it's going to somebody that's higher than you. And whether there's consequences to that or not, it's a bloody good shot at it. So I think stuff like that. And I'm saying that because as a mining community, we understand what we need to do. But if we look at what other people are doing, maybe we can learn a little more. The other thing about trust is that a lot of the stuff that came out of the Wentzel conversation was that I can't report him because his wife's my friend. You know, that's the one thing. It's our socialization, basically. The other thing is, am I safe when I report him? Not only from the organization, but from in the community. Will he harass me? Will he tell his friends to harass me? Will he take my life? Will he harm my children? And that happens often. I'm guilty. I feel guilty when I say to people report, because sometimes the situation is so ambiguous. I don't know if it's going to be worse for her to report. Am I endangering her life? So trust in your little system, but trust in the broader system. When people that are convicted of murder can get jobs somewhere else, there's no trust in the South African legal system. So trust is a big thing. Culture is a big thing, and I think on paper we've got it down. I think we know where to report, how to report, but it's the psychology behind it as well.
You know, we spoke a little bit about the whole process of the whole GBV and where it sits within our legislation, where it sits within our policies. And as the Minerals Council, you know, Khumbulekaya it's big for us. And I think, you know, having brought in the health and safety aspects to this at the very beginning also helped to shape our conversation. There were talks about, you know, just the dangers of silence. And I thought, how many cases have people brought to our attention and what have we done about it? In some cases, it's just, you know, it's been a conversation where somebody said, you know, X, Y, and Z has happened. In other cases, I think if you're more within the HR space, it's a lot more serious and you've had to work in that space. So I hope the people that are in this room here today, whether you're coming from HR, coming from ER, coming from procurement, because this issue is becoming, you know, cross board within all the different departments of the organization. I hope we've all taken something and learned that we can't be silent. I think one of the things that I kind of wrote down was we need to break the silence in order to end the violence. So big thing for me is, you know, whatever comes up, even if you just take down little notes, find a way to, escalate the issue and make sure that that person's voice and the issue that they're bringing to you actually gets, you know, elevated and can get resolved. I think it would be a huge injustice to, you know, allow some of these topics and some of these issues to not be resolved. And I think we need to stand up and start making that difference. I'm not going to go through all the little different notes, but I think one of the other things that, you know, was critical in this was, one, yes, we need to listen. Yes, we need to report. Yes, we need to show empathy and show support. And I think what also came up, you know, now, especially again, during the panel discussion was justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. And I think that's so critical. Yes, when issues are raised and, you know, the perpetrator is found to be guilty, yes, they might be dismissed, but yes, let's talk about it. I mean, let that person be known so that we all know why they left. Let it not become a little silent exit for someone, and, you know, we then don't know why the person left or and things like that. So very big for me. I think, you know, let's just talk about it and make sure we can name and shame the perpetrators. There were talks, or there was a point about, you know, doing criminal background checks. I think some of the points are, you know, within HR, what are we doing? Are we doing those things? Are we doing them adequately? Let's do a little bit more about that. And I think also, because this has become a multi-sectorial issue, I think one of the points that came out also earlier was, how do we upskill the NPA? So maybe that's another thing that within our budgets, within our, you know, just some of our policies and procedures, or some of the things that we need to be doing as the Minerals Council. You know, right now we have a partnership with the NPA and the GBVF fund. But I think this upskilling the NPA is something that we need to consider. You know, we are having a few bottlenecks in our TCC's environment. Maybe this is an area where we can start to redirect some of the pledged funding towards that area. So we are sitting with something like 21 million Rand. There are issues with some of the TCCs, but this is an issue that's happening right now. It's happening today. And we can assist by just upskilling the NPA. So maybe something that we can talk about, think about. And I think this issue has always been, and again, it came up again, you know, what about us? Is it a man issue? Is it a woman issue? And it always comes down to, it's a human rights issue. Yes, it is. But I think we need to be able to learn to listen to all sides. The reason why women are bringing this up is because in most instances, they are the ones that are the victims. But again, how do we make sure that the men that are also victims in this can have their voices heard and validated? How do we, as a society, truly change? I mean, we know, yes, we talk about it's a cultural change that is required, but do we truly understand what that means? So are we able to ensure that, we are allowing and teaching and providing a space for our boys and our men to be vulnerable? We talk about the Queen Bee syndrome. I mean, I think every single WiMSA or WiM conversation that we've always had, this topic always comes up, but what are we doing about it? What are we truly doing about it? So do you have to appear with your masculine, aspects to be able to become a leader in this environment? No, we definitely do not. So we need to start, respecting the fact that we are different. The power dynamics are, not the same, but we bring different things to the table. And therefore, with our differences, how do we make sure that we can change our environments, and starting with just changing our work environments? I mean, it will spill over into society. Our current control is at the workplace. And it does spill over into communities, because as mining companies, we know that anything and everything that we do will always spill over into the community. Our SLPs are our social license to operate. So therefore, we know that we are not, this little beautiful space in the middle of a hollow environment. The communities are part of us, and we are part of them. And therefore, we need to just make sure that we can create the differences that we need to do. One of the other really big thing that I thought, without talking about this, it would be a bit of a miss. When you spoke about transforming the hearts of boys and the behaviors of boys, what are we doing as parents? And I think quite a few people within this room are at that stage where they are either parents, guardians, aunts, uncles looking after children. What exactly is it that we are doing to ensure that we can create a better space and a better world? And how do we transform the hearts and, minds and the behaviors of our boys? Because they are growing up to be men, and because of the stats, we understand that men are the biggest perpetrators of GBV. So how do we help change that? How do we change the society that we want to live in going forward? And I think I'm gonna end off with a snippet of I think when we started, everyone was being a poet, and I thought, now I must find a quote. Yes, that. But I thought kind of scribbled down quite a few. But I think a song came into mind for me, and it's a song about a song by Pink. Which says, what about us? We are searchlights and we can see the dark. We are rockets painted up at the stars. We are billions of beautiful hearts. And you sold us down the river too far. Let's stop selling each other down the river. Let's make the change that we know we need in this lifetime. Thank you very much.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been an absolute pleasure. You've been an amazing audience. You've been amazing attendees. I also want to say a special thank you to the attendees online. If you would believe that we've got 90 people that are still online from 120 when we first started early this morning. So big round of applause to you. Thank you so much.